The walls that breathe fear. Before we dive into the madness, remember, stories like this are real, raw, and unforgettable. Hit subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts, because what you're about to hear might change how you see prison life forever. The night was thick and unmoving over San Quentin State Prison, its massive concrete walls rising like the bones of an old beast. From above, the compound looked asleep, but inside, no one ever truly slept. Inmates shifted restlessly in their bunks, guards marched along catwalks with flashlights slicing through the darkness, and the faint hum of voices never stopped. But that night, everything changed. At 2:17 a.m., the alarms went off. A blaring, metallic scream echoed through every cell block. Officer Daniels sprinted down the corridor of East Block, the section housing death row inmates. A call had come from the surveillance unit. Something was wrong in cell 209. When Daniels reached the cell, the door was ajar. That shouldn't have been possible. Inside, inmate Lewis Crane sat perfectly still on the concrete floor, his eyes wide open but empty, lifeless. Blood streaked across the wall behind him in a strange spiral pattern. It wasn't splatter. It was drawn deliberately. Crane had been inside San Quentin for 15 years. A convicted murderer, yes, but quiet, disciplined, almost obsessive about routines. He never spoke out of turn, never caused trouble. Yet now he was dead. And the only clue was that eerie spiral painted with his own blood. By morning, the story had already spread through every cell block. The inmates whispered about the mark. Some said it was a warning. Others said it was a message to someone still inside. Warden Keller called in Detective Maria Hart, a criminal psychologist known for handling complex inmate cases. She'd worked with the FBI on behavioral studies, figuring out how men survived long-term imprisonment without losing their minds. Now she stood in Crane's cell, studying the spiral. "It's not random," she murmured, her voice steady but low. "It's focused, calculated. Whoever, or whatever, did this wanted it seen." The guard beside her shifted uneasily. "You think it's a message?" Hart nodded slowly. "It's a mind under pressure. Either Crane left this as his last statement, or someone wanted us to believe that." When she checked the prison logs, something stood out. At 1:45 a.m., just 30 minutes before the alarms, 2 cameras on the East Wing had gone dark for exactly 9 minutes. When they came back online, everything looked normal. Except one thing. Crane's cell light flickered twice. Hart began interviewing inmates who'd known Crane. One name came up more than once: Deshaun Duke Miller, a former gang enforcer serving life without parole. Duke and Crane had worked together in the laundry unit. On paper, they were quiet co-workers. In reality, they hadn't spoken in weeks. When Hart sat across from Duke in the interview room, he smiled like he already knew why she was there. "You think I did that to Crane?" he asked. "Lady, Crane wasn't killed. He broke." "Broke?" Hart leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Duke stared at her for a moment, then said, "This place eats you. Some men talk to walls. Others start listening back." Hart felt a chill crawl up her neck. She'd studied the psychology of isolation, the slow erosion of identity inside prison walls. But this felt like something else. Crane's death wasn't just an act of violence. It was the collapse of a mind that had tried too hard to stay sane. As she continued digging, a troubling pattern emerged. Over the past 6 months, 4 inmates had been transferred out of East Block for psychiatric instability. Each had scratched the same spiral symbol into their cell walls before being removed. None of them had been officially documented in reports. Someone was covering it up. Hart confronted the warden with the files. Keller looked pale. "We're running a maximum security facility," he said sharply. Rumors spread fast. "We can't afford panic." "But this isn't rumor," Hart countered. "These men are unraveling. Something or someone is pushing them there." That night, she requested full surveillance access. But at exactly 11:06 p.m., while reviewing the camera feeds, her monitor went black. Static buzzed for a moment, then the image returned, showing her own office door, wide open. She froze. She hadn't left it that way. Hart stood, cautiously approached, and pushed the door open wider. On her desk, a sheet of paper had been placed on top of Crane's case file. No footprints, no signs of entry. Just a note written in thick blue ink. You can't study survival. You have to earn it. The next morning, she demanded a sweep of her office. Security found nothing. No fingerprints, no footage of anyone entering. The only thing they did find, hidden in the file room behind a loose panel, was a box containing unreported inmate journals, dating back years. Every one of them written by prisoners who'd spent time in East Block. Each journal detailed vivid hallucinations, paranoia, and one recurring phrase: "The walls breathe." Hart flipped through the last entry in Crane's book. The handwriting was shaking, desperate. If you stay silent long enough, the prison starts whispering back. It tells you things you can't unhear. It tells you what to do next. She looked up, her mind spinning. If Crane had been hearing the same voices as the others, who, or what, had pushed him to die in such a deliberate, symbolic way? And more importantly, why were the reports hidden? But before she could investigate further, her phone buzzed. It was Officer Daniels. His voice was tight, panicked. "Detective Hart, you need to get down here. We found another one." She froze. Another what? Daniels hesitated. Another spiral. And this time it's in a guard's locker. The mind games inside San Quentin. The call came at 4:12 a.m., and Detective Maria Hart was already awake. Sleep had become a stranger since Louis Crane's death. Her dreams had been filled with whispers, flickering lights, and the image of that spiral, spinning endlessly in her mind. Now, standing in the cold locker room beneath San Quentin's East Wing, she stared at the newest one. Drawn with black marker across the inside of a steel locker door, the spiral looked freshly done, the ink still smudged where someone's finger had traced it. But what made her stomach twist was the locker's owner, Officer Daniels. The same officer who'd found Crane's body. Daniels stood a few feet away, his face pale, his eyes hollow. "I didn't put that there," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "I swear I didn't." Hart studied him, the twitch in his jaw, the nervous flick of his eyes toward the door. He wasn't lying. He was scared. "Who else has access to this room?" she asked. "Only correctional staff. And maintenance." She turned to the warden, who stood nearby with his arms crossed. "Get me the staff logs for the past 48 hours. Every person who's been in, or out of this block." Warden Keller nodded, but didn't meet her eyes. He looked exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from something heavier. Guilt. Fear. She couldn't tell which. When he left, Hart crouched in front of the locker and ran her fingers near the spiral, careful not to touch it. Beneath the ink, faint scratches marred the metal, like the symbol had been carved there before and repainted. Someone had been marking this place for a long time. Later that morning, Hart returned to her temporary office and pinned photos to the wall. The crime scene, Crane's cell, the journals, and now, Daniel's locker. She stepped back and drew lines between them. 4 dead inmates. 1 guard's locker marked. 6 missing files. 9 minutes of blackout on surveillance. It didn't make sense, unless someone inside was orchestrating it. That's when her phone buzzed again. It was Dr. Rourke, the prison psychiatrist. "I heard about the spiral," he said without greeting. His voice carried the calm tone of a man used to chaos. "You should come to the infirmary. There's something you need to see." When Hart arrived, Rourke led her into the psychiatric observation room. A young inmate, early 20s, shaved head, trembling hands, sat chained to a chair, staring at the wall. "This is Marcus Vale," Rourke said softly. "He was transferred here 2 days ago from East Block. He hasn't spoken to anyone since Crane's death until today." Hart approached slowly. "Marcus," she said. "I'm Detective Hart. I'm trying to find out what happened to your friend." Marcus's lips twitched. "He wasn't my friend. Then why did you draw the spiral in your cell?" His eyes snapped up, wide and wild. "It keeps the voices quiet." Hart froze. "What voices?" Marcus leaned forward, as far as his restraints would allow. "The ones in the walls. They tell us things. They tell us who's next. Rourke frowned, making a subtle motion to stop the conversation, but Hart ignored him. "Who's next, Marcus?" she asked. Marcus smiled, a small, broken thing. "The guards." That night, the prison felt heavier. The air itself seemed thicker, as though the building were breathing. Hart sat in the surveillance room, reviewing hours of footage again, trying to spot anything, a flicker, a shadow, a reflection. Then she saw it. At 1:06 a.m., just outside East Block, a figure walked past the camera, wearing a correctional officer's uniform. But the badge number didn't match anyone on staff. The figure paused near the electrical panel, reached up, and turned off the power to that entire hallway. 9 minutes later, the exact same duration as the previous blackout, the lights came back on, and the figure was gone. Hart enhanced the footage, zooming in on the badge patch. The name was smudged, but one detail stood out, a long, thin scar running down the man's cheek. Her pulse quickened. She'd seen that scar before. Officer Hendrik Shaw, a veteran guard who'd been on medical leave for over a year after being attacked by an inmate. But according to the warden's records, Shaw was never reinstated. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near San Quentin. Hart immediately called Keller. "Warden, where is Officer Shaw?" Silence. "Keller?" The warden's voice came through, low and shaken. "Detective, Shaw died 11 months ago. Suicide. In his home." Hart froze, the air draining from her lungs. Then who the hell was that on the footage? The next morning, a storm rolled across the bay. Rain lashed against the glass as Hart entered the prison chapel, the only quiet place left in the entire facility. She found Rourke there, lighting a candle. "You believe in redemption, Doctor?" she asked. Rourke smiled faintly. "I believe the mind can't survive without hope." Hart handed him a copy of the footage. "Then explain this. A man who's supposed to be dead is walking these halls, shutting off power during every incident tied to the spirals." Rourke watched in silence, his face unreadable. When the clip ended, he exhaled slowly. "That's not Shaw." "What do you mean?" "It's someone wearing Shaw's uniform." Hart narrowed her eyes. "Someone inside?" Rourke turned to face her, his expression heavy. "Detective, I think whoever's doing this isn't just targeting inmates. They're experimenting." "Experimenting on what?" "The limits of sanity." That night, Officer Daniels disappeared. His car was still in the parking lot, his locker untouched. But his radio, found at the base of the guard tower, was transmitting faint static, looping one phrase over and over. "Survival is the only truth." Hart stared at the receiver, the same phrase echoing from Crane's journal. The walls of San Quentin weren't just confining men. They were breaking them, reshaping them, and now, consuming the very people meant to control them. When she checked the camera logs from that night, her blood ran cold. The final footage of Daniels showed him walking down the east corridor, following someone. Someone wearing Hart's jacket. The hidden experiment. Rain hammered against the glass like a warning as Detective Maria Hart sat in her car outside San Quentin. The prison loomed ahead, dark, ancient, and alive. Her phone buzzed nonstop. News outlets, the DA's office, and the FBI. Everyone wanted answers about the missing officer. But she wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not when every instinct told her that something unspeakable was happening inside those walls. Daniels was gone. His voice, "Survival is the only truth," still echoed in her ears. She'd heard those exact words before, buried in Crane's final journal entry. "They're watching who breaks and who adapts. Survival is the only truth." But who are they? When Hart finally walked back through the gates, the guards stared at her with uneasy eyes. She wasn't just an investigator anymore. She was part of the story. The halls seemed to hum, the fluorescent lights flickering above her head as though the building itself knew she was getting close. In her temporary office, the evidence board was a tangle of red string and black and white photos. Inmates, guards, timestamps. But when she stared at the center photo, the spiral symbol, a new pattern clicked. The deaths, the disappearances, the blackouts. They all happened near the same section, the lower east wing, known among inmates as the hole. but the hole had been sealed for almost a decade. Or so she'd been told. The warden's office door creaked open when she pushed it. Warden Keller was inside, packing files into a leather briefcase. "Going somewhere?" Hart asked. Keller froze. "Detective Hart. I was just leaving before I find out what's buried under your prison." His eyes flicked to the door, then back to her. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then make me understand." He sighed, sitting back down. 10 years ago, the Department of Corrections partnered with a private contractor, a neuroscience group from San Diego. They called it Project Reprieve. The goal was to test the psychological limits of isolation, to see if certain inmates could be conditioned into compliance or complete collapse. Hart felt her pulse in her throat. "You ran experiments on prisoners?" Keller shook his head quickly. "Not me. The company. They promised behavioral reform, rehabilitation without violence. But things went wrong. Some subjects stopped eating. Others began carving symbols, spirals, into the walls. One man gouged it into his own chest." Hart stepped closer. "And the files? Destroyed. Or so I thought. The company vanished after the state pulled funding. But someone never stopped." 2 hours later, Hart stood in front of the hole, a rusted steel door welded shut and sealed with warning tape, so old the letters had faded. With a crowbar in hand and 2 guards standing watch, she pried it open. The smell hit her first, damp concrete, rust, and something faintly chemical. Her flashlight cut through the dark as she descended the narrow stairs. At the bottom, the light found writing on the walls. Dozens of spirals, drawn in charcoal, blood, and ink. Words scrawled beneath them. Endure. Adapt. Obey. And then, at the far end, a door with a cracked glass panel. Inside was an abandoned lab, metal tables, broken restraints, flickering monitors. Old equipment labeled NeuroStim Prototype. A monitor blinked to life. A grainy video began to play. Louis Crane sat in the frame, head shaved, wires attached to his temples. A voice off-screen spoke. Subject 14 demonstrates strong resistance to induced deprivation. Marked aggression during auditory phase. Increase voltage. Crane screamed, the sound distorted by static. The same spiral symbol appeared on the monitor beside his vitals. Then the video cut out. Hart's flashlight shook in her hand. Every instinct screamed to get out, but then she saw movement in the corner. A shadow. "Who's there?" The figure stepped into the dim light. Dr. Rourke. His face calm, almost serene. "I hoped you'd find this place," he said softly. "You're the only one smart enough to see the pattern." Hart raised her weapon. "What is this, Rourke? Were you part of it?" "I am it," he said simply. "The human mind can't evolve in comfort. San Quentin was a laboratory long before I arrived. I just perfected the conditions." "You killed Crane." Rourke shook his head. He freed himself. "The spiral isn't madness, detective. It's order, a map of survival. Those who accept it endure. Those who resist vanish." Hart tightened her grip. "You turned a prison into a science experiment." He smiled faintly. "Into a sanctuary." Before she could respond, the lights cut out. Total darkness swallowed the corridor. Her radio crackled to life, Daniel's voice echoing once more. "Survival is the only truth." Hart fired blindly, 1 shot, 2, 3. The muzzle flashes lit the hallway in brief bursts of blue-white light. When the lights flickered back on, Rourke was gone. Only his voice remained, playing from a nearby speaker. "I've already moved beyond these walls. The experiment continues, detective. You're part of it now." Days later, federal agents stormed San Quentin. The lower levels were sealed off, the surviving inmates transferred. The prison went quiet, but Hart didn't rest. She spent hours reviewing every file, every fragment of data recovered from the lab. And that's when she found one final document, labeled Subject 01. It wasn't Crane. It wasn't Daniels. It wasn't any inmate. It was her. Maria Hart, the file read. Embedded observer. Behavioral stress subject. Exposure phase complete. Her reflection in the monitor flickered, for just a second, replaced by a face that wasn't hers, staring back through the screen, tracing a spiral into the fogged glass. She blinked and it was gone. Outside, the bay fog rolled in, wrapping San Quentin in white silence. The experiment hadn't ended. It had evolved. And somewhere, deep beneath those ancient concrete walls, a voice whispered through the static once more. Survival is the only truth. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one, hit subscribe because the truth is never what it seems.